The low hum of the TCS Vigilance was the only lullaby Commander Eva Rostova had known for the better part of a decade, a constant thrum that resonated deep in her bones, more familiar than the silence of a planet-side apartment she rarely saw. It was the sound of recycled air, of the fusion core's steady heartbeat, of the grav plates straining against the void. Here, in the churning, purple-black clouds of the Tartarus Nebula, it was the sound of isolation. Her ship, a Gladius-class patrol cruiser, was a gray utilitarian blade cutting through a sea of cosmic dust and stellar ghosts. It wasn't a flagship, not a gleaming symbol of the Terran Confederation's might, but a workhorse, scarred and patched from a dozen skirmishes on the fringes of human space. The Vigilance and its crew were humanity's watchdogs, patrolling a frontier that was growing more dangerous by the cycle. The formal reports called it a region of unclaimed territory, but Eva knew better. It was a buffer zone, a no-man's land separating the rapidly expanding Terran sphere from the ancient, serene expanse of the Athelian Concordat. The Concordat. Even the name felt heavy, spoken in hushed tones in the mess halls and whispered over encrypted channels. They were the old blood of the galaxy, an empire of beings so advanced and so steeped in tradition that they viewed humanity's explosive arrival on the galactic stage with a kind of detached, paternalistic concern. They never threatened, never postured. They spoke of harmony, of balance, of the great quiet, their philosophy of cosmic order. But their peace was the peace of a perfectly curated garden, and humanity was the weed, disruptive and stubbornly refusing to be pruned. Eva stood on the command deck, a stark, circular room where the only light came from the soft glow of holographic displays and the immense viewport that framed the nebula's violent beauty. She was a woman carved from the same pragmatic steel as her ship, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes holding the weary vigilance of someone who had seen too many promises broken in the cold vacuum of space. Around her, her bridge crew worked with a quiet, practiced efficiency that she had instilled in them. They were a family forged in close quarters and shared danger. Anything on the long-range scanners? "Mr. Gian," she asked, her voice calm and even. Lieutenant Jian Li, her tactical officer, swiveled in his chair. He was younger than the rest of the command staff, his face still holding a fire that hadn't yet been banked by the endless, grinding patrols. He saw the Concordat not as a venerable institution, but as a gilded cage, and he rattled its bars with a defiant energy that both worried and impressed Eva. "Same as the last sweep, Commander," he reported, his fingers dancing across a console. "Background radiation, gravimetric distortions, and the usual ghost signals from the Corsair's graveyard. Nothing solid." The Corsair's graveyard was a particularly dense asteroid field within the nebula, named for the pirate fleets that had met their end in its treacherous currents. It was the perfect place to hide. "Keep scanning," Eva ordered, "and focus on emissions. I don't care about rocks and radiation. I want to know if anything out there is burning fuel." She had a feeling, a cold knot in her gut that had kept her on the bridge for the last 18 hours. Official intelligence claimed the recent spike in raids on Terran colonies was the work of the Cathar, a scavenger clan of reptilian marauders who had plagued this sector for generations. But the raids were different now. They were too coordinated, too precise. The Cathar were brutes, not strategists. And they were suddenly hitting targets with weapon systems far beyond their typical cobbled-together arsenal. They were being supplied. Eva was sure of it. And she was equally sure who was pulling the strings from behind a veil of benevolent diplomacy. A soft chime drew her attention. "Commander, I'm picking something up," Jian said, his voice tight with focus. "A convoy. 6 heavy freighters. Running dark. Minimal emissions. They're deep in the graveyard, using the grav spikes to mask their approach." Ava moved to a station, her eyes narrowing as she studied the tactical display. 6 unmarked freighters, flying in perfect formation, their engines cold venting to reduce their thermal signature. This was no merchant convoy. This was a military operation. No transponders, none ma'am. They're running completely silent. If it weren't for that last gravimetric wave reflecting off their hulls, we would have missed them entirely. "They're good," Ava murmured, a grudging respect mixing with a rising sense of dread. "Too good for smugglers. Plot an intercept course, but keep us outside their sensor range. I want a full spectral analysis of their drives and power cores. Let's see who built their ships." The Vigilance altered its course, sinking deeper into the nebula's oppressive gloom. For 2 hours, it was a tense, silent hunt. Ava's crew used the environment with practiced skill, ducking behind massive, iron-rich asteroids to break sensor locks, venting their own heat into stellar nurseries to mask their signature. They were the ghost hunting the ghosts. Finally, the analysis came back, the data scrolling across the main screen. Jian swore under his breath. "Commander, the drive signatures are Ethelian, concordant design, military grade." The words hung in the air of the command deck, heavy and cold. It was one thing to suspect, to theorize in classified briefings. It was another to have the proof staring you in the face. The Ethelian Concordat, the great peacemakers, were arming the very raiders who were butchering Terran colonists. They were funding a proxy war on their border, bleeding humanity with 1,000 small cuts, while their diplomats spoke of mutual understanding and shared destiny. "They're making a rendezvous," Jian added, pointing to a projected flight path. "Another 3 hours. They'll link up with a Cathar battle group waiting on the far side of the graveyard." Ava's mind raced. Terran High Command's standing orders were explicit. Under no circumstances are Confederation fleet assets to engage Concordat forces without direct authorization. Contact was to be avoided. Conflict was to be de-escalated. The politicians on Earth were terrified of an open war with an empire that had been ancient when humanity was still chipping flint. An attack on this convoy would be an unambiguous act of war, but letting it go meant condemning more colonies to fire and death. "Open a secure channel to Admiral Vance," Ava commanded, her voice like ice. "Encrypt this entire data package and transmit it on a tight beam. Priority Alpha." The next hour was the longest of her career. The Vigilance shadowed the convoy, a predator holding its breath. The evidence of betrayal sent hurtling through the void toward High Command. Ava paced the bridge, the hum of the ship now a maddening, grating noise. She could picture the admirals on Titan, the frantic meetings, the political calculations. They would weigh the lives on the frontier against the stability of the entire Confederation. The answer, when it came, felt like a physical blow. A single, encrypted line of text appeared on her command console. "Order acknowledged. Maintain surveillance. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Vance sends." Jian slammed his fist on his console. "They're letting them go. After this, they're just going to let them arm those butchers. Belay that, Lieutenant." Ava snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument, but she felt the same rage coiling in her own stomach. They were being told to stand down. to watch the weapons change hands and then dutifully file a report that would be buried in a mountain of diplomatic red tape. It was cowardice, dressed up as strategy. As if on cue, another alert flashed on the tactical display. The Cathar battle group, no longer waiting, flared its engines to life, and the Ghost convoy, its mission complete, began to disperse, its component freighters peeling off in different directions to be swallowed by the nebula. The Cathar, however, were not running. Their 3 cruisers, now bristling with the deadly, elegant energy cannons of Athelian design, turned as one. Their new course was projected on the main screen, a blood-red line stretching out of the nebula. It pointed directly toward a small, green dot on the edge of the sector map. "My God," the helm officer whispered. "That's Haven. Haven. An agricultural colony. Barely a settlement. Really, a few thousand civilians, mostly farmers and their families. Its planetary defense grid consisted of a handful of outdated kinetic cannons, useless against concordate-grade shielding. It was a soft target. A message. The Cathar weren't just raiding, they were making a statement on behalf of their patrons. A warning to the upstart humans to know their place. Frantic alerts began to flicker on the comms panel as Haven's orbital station picked up the approaching fleet. Their distress calls were thin, desperate pleas slicing through the static. "Mayday. Mayday. This is Haven Control. We are under attack by unidentified vessels. They're weapons. We've never seen anything like it. We need immediate military assistance. Is anyone out there?" The voice was young, terrified. Eva looked at the tactical map. The Cathar were minutes from orbital insertion. The Vigilance was the only Terran ship within a week's travel at full burn. She looked at the order from Admiral Vance, still glowing on her screen. "Do not engage." Then she looked at the faces of her crew, at Jian's barely contained fury, at the grim set of her helmsman's jaw, at the fear and resolve in the eyes of her comms officer listening to Haven's dying pleas. They were all looking at her. The hum of the ship seemed to fade, replaced by the pounding of her own heart. She had her orders. Obey. And she would keep her career, her ship, and her crew safe, and a colony of thousands would burn. Disobey, and she would save them. But in doing so, she would light a fire that could consume the entire galaxy. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, she stood in the suffocating silence of the command deck, the weight of 2 futures resting on her shoulders. Then she took a steadying breath, the cold, pragmatic calculus of a commander who had made impossible choices before settling over her like a shroud. Her decision was made. She turned to Jian, her eyes as hard as polished chrome. "Mr. Jian," she said, her voice clear and cutting through the tension. "Sound general quarters." A slow, predatory smile spread across the young officer's face. He slammed his hand down on the alarm panel. "Aye, Commander." The klaxon blared, a jarring, angry cry that echoed through the ship. Red combat lighting washed over the bridge, and the low hum of the Vigilance rose to a deep, resonant growl as the fusion core spooled up to full power. Ava strode to the center of the command deck, her boots echoing on the metal floor. She was no longer just a watchdog. She was the tip of the spear. "Helm," she barked, her gaze fixed on the enemy fleet threatening to extinguish a small point of light. "Set a course for Haven. Maximum burn. We're going hunting." The TCS Vigilance was not built for speed, but for endurance. Yet, under the desperate, full-throated roar of its main drive, the patrol cruiser felt like a charging beast, shedding its customary patience for raw, kinetic fury. On the main viewport, the Tartarus Nebula's ethereal purples and blues were a blur, a cosmic watercolor smeared by their velocity. The only point of stillness was their destination, the small, defiant flicker of Haven's system, now eclipsed by the 3 blood-red icons of the Cathar fleet. The comms channel from the colony was a chaotic symphony of terror, static-laced shouts, the shriek of failing systems, and the distant, percussive crump of orbital impacts painted a grim picture. Ava filtered it all out, her focus narrowing to the cold, hard geometry of the engagement to come. Her ship was a single, aging blade against 3 freshly whetted axes, and a clumsy approach would see them shattered. "Bring us in on a high-G deceleration burn," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. "I want to come in over their northern pole. Use the planet's magnetic field to mask our final approach. Divert all non-essential power to the forward shields and the spinal cannon. I want that mass driver charged and ready the second we clear the magnetic shadow." Her crew responded without hesitation, their movements a blur of practiced competence. There was no fear on their faces, only a grim, focused intensity. They had followed Eva Rostova into hell before. This was just a new circle. "Weapons lock," Jan Lee announced, his knuckles white on the controls. "Lead Cathar cruiser, the Gorfang. It's their flagship. Shields are flaring Concordate tech. Just like we thought, they're running hot." The Cathar were brutes, but not fools. They had detected the Vigilance's screaming approach. 2 of the cruisers broke formation, angling to create a pincer while the Gorfang continued its devastating bombardment of Haven's orbital defenses. It was a classic Raider tactic: divide and conquer. "They're trying to split our fire," Eva noted, a flicker of something like appreciation in her eyes. "They're not used to fighting a Terran cruiser. They think we'll play their game." She leaned forward, her hand resting on the Central Command console. "Helm, ignore the flankers. All forward momentum. We're punching straight through to the flagship. Comms. Broadcast on all Confederation military frequencies. TCS Vigilance engaging hostile forces at Haven. We are the sole military asset in system. For the record." It was her final act of defiance against High Command, a declaration etched into the official logs for whatever court-martial was to come. She was burning her career to the ground to buy these colonists a few more hours of life. The Vigilance bucked hard as the first wave of Athelian energy bolts struck its forward shields. The air on the bridge crackled with ozone, and the lights flickered. On the main screen, the shield strength indicator dipped from a solid green into yellow. The damage reports were instantaneous, relayed by the calm, synthetic voice of the ship's AI. Minor scoring on the forward armor plate. Shield harmonics destabilizing under sustained fire. "Don't let up," Eva roared. "Gian, target their forward energy projectors. They're channeling most of their power into the planetary bombardment. Give them a reason to pay attention to us." The cruiser's forward batteries, a series of heavy laser cannons, answered with a salvo of incandescent rage, beams of pure white energy, far cruder but more powerful than the elegant Athelian bolts, slammed into the Gorfang. The Cathar ship's shields shimmered, absorbing the impact, but the sheer kinetic force of the Terran weapons made the much larger vessel visibly shudder. The flagship turned, its bombardment of Haven ceasing as it brought its full broadside to bear on the audacious attacker. It was exactly what Ava had wanted. "They've taken the bait," she said, her voice dropping to a low, predatory calm. "The flankers are moving to support. Helm. Execute pattern Rostova 9. The helmsman grinned. It was a maneuver they had practiced endlessly in simulations. A brutal, close-quarters gambit that relied on perfect timing. The Vigilance didn't turn. Instead, its vertical thrusters fired, pushing the ship into a sharp, bone-jarring upward slide relative to the orbital plane. For a terrifying moment, they presented their vulnerable underbelly to the enemy, the Cathar. Expecting a standard turning fight, unleashed a full salvo at where the Vigilance should have been. A torrent of energy bolts tore through empty space. As the enemy cannons began their recharge cycle, the Vigilance's thrusters fired again, flipping the ship end over end in a dizzying pirouette. They were now flying backward, their powerful main engines facing the enemy. "Burn," Ava commanded. The main drive ignited not as a tool of propulsion, but as a weapon. A colossal plume of raw fusion fire, millions of degrees hot, washed over the space where the Cathar flankers were converging. Their advanced shields, designed to repel focused energy bolts and kinetic slugs, were overwhelmed by the sheer, all-encompassing thermal shock. Alarms shrieked across the Cathar command channels as their forward shields overloaded and their hulls began to glow cherry red. One of the cruisers, its systems fried, tumbled out of control, venting atmosphere from a dozen fresh ruptures. The other recoiled, its attack broken. But the maneuver came at a cost. The strain on the Vigilance's inertial dampeners was immense. On the bridge, consoles sparked and a secondary power conduit blew out in a shower of sparks, plunging one side of the room into darkness. "Damage report," Ava snapped, holding on to a railing as the deck pitched. "Aft shields are down to 30%. We have hull breaches on decks 7 and 9. Medical teams responding." The voice from the damage control station was strained but steady. "Good enough." Eva grunted. They had bought themselves a window. The Gore Fang was now alone, its support scattered and damaged. "Mr. Jane." That spinal cannon charged, and locked. "Commander," he replied, his eyes gleaming in the combat lighting. "The Gorfang is trying to bring its main guns back online, but we're inside their optimal firing arc. They're too close." The spinal mass driver was the Vigilance's Alpha Strike, a weapon that drew power directly from the ship's fusion core to launch a solid tungsten slug at a fraction of the speed of light. It was a ship killer, but it took an agonizingly long time to recharge. "You got one shot. Fire," Ava said quietly. A deep, resonant thump vibrated through the entire ship, a feeling more than a sound, as thousands of tons of electromagnetic force hurled the projectile into the void. On the screen, a tiny sliver of metal, almost invisible, crossed the distance between the two ships in the blink of an eye. The Athelian shields, for all their sophistication, were designed to dissipate energy, not to stop a small moon moving at impossible speeds. The tungsten slug punched through the forward shield as if it were soap film. It struck the Gorfang's armored prow, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the kinetic energy transfer took place. The front third of the Cathar flagship simply ceased to exist, vaporized into an expanding cloud of superheated gas and molten shrapnel. The rest of the ship, its spine broken and its reactor containment failing, was consumed in a silent, blinding flash of white light, A collective sigh of relief went through the bridge crew. The two remaining Cathar ships, seeing their flagship annihilated and their own systems crippled, did the only sensible thing. They turned and fled, their drives flaring as they vanished back into the nebula's embrace. The battle was over. The silence that followed was more profound than the chaos that had preceded it. On the comms, Haven's frantic pleas had been replaced by stunned, sobbing relief. Vigilance, you did it. You saved us. God, you saved us. Damage control teams. Full report, Eva ordered, her voice betraying a slight tremor of exhaustion. Medical, give me casualty numbers. And get a line to Haven Control. I want to know the extent of the damage to their orbital stations. The numbers, when they came, were sobering. 12 dead, 34 wounded. The aft section of the ship was a wreck, and the main drive was running at 60% efficiency. They had won, but they were bleeding. As the adrenaline faded, the crushing weight of her decision returned. She had saved Haven. She had also, in all likelihood, started a war. An urgent chime from the comm station cut through her thoughts. It wasn't Haven. It was a military channel, a quantum-encrypted tight beam transmission from the direction of Titan. Admiral Vance. Eva straightened up, squaring her shoulders. On screen, the Admiral's face materialized on the main display. He was a man who looked like he had been carved from granite, his eyes holding the cold, distant light of a dying star. There was no anger in his expression, only a profound, weary disappointment. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply staring at her, the silence a condemnation in itself. When he did, his voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Commander Rostova, I have your after-action report, and I have the logs from your For the Record broadcast. You have directly, willfully, and egregiously disobeyed a direct order from Fleet Command. You have engaged and destroyed vessels equipped with technology belonging to a senior galactic power. You have, in a single hour of reckless glory-seeking, potentially destabilized a century of peace and doomed billions of lives. Each word was a nail in the coffin of her career. Admiral, Eva began, her own voice steady. With respect, the Cathar were annihilating a civilian colony with concordant weapons. There was no time to wait for a committee to debate the political ramifications. Your job is not to debate. Commander Vance's voice rose for the first time, a flash of the fury he held in check. It is to obey. You are a scalpel, Rostova, meant for precise, quiet work on the frontier. Instead, you have taken that scalpel and stabbed it into the heart of a sleeping dragon. As of this moment, you are relieved of your command. The TCS Valiant is en route to your position. You will surrender your ship and your crew and await court-martial. He paused, his gaze seeming to pierce through the screen. However, he continued, the single word shifting the entire tone of the conversation. The Valiant is 3 days away. The Concordate will undoubtedly detect the energy signatures from the battle and will send observers to clean up their mess. They cannot be allowed to recover the wreckage of the Cathar ships. The evidence of their involvement must be secured. Irrefutable proof is the only thing that might prevent the politicians from hanging you to appease the Concordate. It wasn't an order. It was something else. A lifeline. A sliver of a chance, buried beneath the official condemnation. Vance was disavowing her, cutting her loose, but he was also telling her what needed to be done. He was giving her a mission that, officially, did not exist. 3 days. Eva, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, using her first name for the first time in a decade. What you do with that time is your own affair. Vance out. The screen went blank. Eva stood motionless, the Admiral's final words echoing in the silent bridge. She was a rogue commander on a damaged ship, with a death sentence hanging over her career. But she had a mission. She had proof to find. She turned to her crew, who had heard every word. They looked at her not with fear or mutiny, but with unwavering loyalty. "You all heard the Admiral," she said, her voice raw. "He's given us an out. Anyone who wants to transfer to the medbay and wait for the Valiant can do so now." With no mark on their record, no one moved. Jian Li stepped forward, speaking for all of them. "We're with you, Commander, all the way." Eva looked at their determined faces and felt a surge of pride that momentarily eclipsed her fear. She had lost her standing, her future, but she had not lost her ship, and she had not lost her crew. "All right then," she said, a grim smile touching her lips. "Get our salvage teams ready. We're going grave robbing." The battlefield was a tomb. What had been a maelstrom of energy and violence was now a silent, drifting graveyard. The remnants of the Cathar flagship, the Gor Fang, were a skeletal ruin, its jagged, blackened hull silhouetted against the soft glow of Haven's atmosphere. Smaller debris feels the guts of crippled fighters, and the scarred hull plates of the damaged cruisers orbited the larger wreck like vultures circling a carcass. The TCS Vigilance, itself wounded and limping, moved through the wreckage with the grim reverence of an undertaker. On the bridge, the frantic energy of battle had been replaced by the methodical hum of a salvage operation. Eva Rostova stood over the main tactical display, now repurposed to show a 3D schematic of the Gorfang's remains. Damage control teams had managed to patch the worst of their own hull breaches and restore auxiliary power. But the ship was a shadow of its former self. Every maneuver was sluggish, every system strained. "Salvage Team 1 is on the wreck, Commander," Jian Li reported from his station. He was coordinating the effort, his voice a low, steady presence in the comms chatter. "They're cutting their way toward the main bridge and the engineering section. Initial scans confirm multiple Athelian power conduits. The energy signatures are undeniable." "I want more than signatures, Jian," Eva said, her eyes tracing a path through the holographic wreck. "I want hardware. I want their targeting logs, their navigation data. I want a manifest that shows where they got these weapons." Vance was clear. "We need irrefutable proof. Something the politicians can't bury or explain away as a misunderstanding. The team is working on it. But the flagship's data core is shielded by 3 meters of collapsed superstructure. It's going to take time." Time was a luxury they didn't have. Every passing minute brought the concordant observers closer. Eva could feel their approach like a change in pressure, a cold shadow falling over the system. The Athelian concordant would not come with guns blazing. That wasn't their style. They would arrive in sleek, silver ships that looked more like art than weapons of war. They would speak with voices full of calm reason, express their deep regret at the violence, and offer to assist the Confederation in its investigation. And under the guise of that assistance, they would erase every trace of their complicity, leaving Eva and her crew holding the bag for an unprovoked attack. "Commander," the comms officer interrupted, her voice tight. Long-range sensors are picking up a vessel emerging from FTL on the edge of the system. It's not the Valiant. Ava was at her side in an instant, her heart a cold, heavy knot in her chest. On the screen, a single, elegant ship resolved from the distortion of hyperspace. It was a concorded vessel, but not a warship. It was smaller, sleeker, a courier or a diplomatic shuttle, its silver hull gleaming. It made no hostile moves, simply gliding into a high orbit, a silent, graceful observer. "They're early," Jian swore under his breath. "They're not here to fight," Ava said, her mind racing. "They're here to watch, to be our witness. When the real fleet arrives, this ship will testify that we were desecrating the dead and tampering with evidence. They're building their narrative." The pressure mounted. A single, unarmed ship had just cornered them more effectively than a fleet. Any aggressive move against it would be an act of outright piracy, proof of humanity's barbarism. "Ignore them," Eva commanded, her voice harder than she intended. "Tell salvage to double their pace. I don't care if they have to melt their way through the hull. I want that data core." Hours crawled by. The concorded ship remained a silent, silver sentinel. On the wreck of the Gorfang, the salvage team, encased in heavy-duty exosuits, worked under floodlights, their plasma cutters sending showers of sparks into the void. The tension on the Vigilance's bridge was thick enough to taste. Every sensor blip, every flicker of static, sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through the crew. Then, a breakthrough. "Commander," wherein a voice crackled over the comm from the salvage team leader. "We've breached the data core housing. It's intact, damaged, but the primary memory banks look solid. We're beginning the extraction now." A wave of relief washed over the bridge. It was short-lived. "Commander," the sensor officer shouted, her eyes wide. Multiple FTL signatures detected. Concord transponders. 3 of them. They're big. Cruiser class. ETA. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Their salvage operation was still underway. Their ship was crippled. They were out of time. "Salvage 1. Get the hell out of there now," Eva yelled into the comm. "Extract what you have and get back to the ship. That's an order, Commander." "We've only downloaded 60% of the core," the team leader protested. "We need more time." "We don't have more time." "Go." Ava turned to Jian. "Get me a firing solution on the wreckage." Jian stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and horror. "Commander, you want to destroy the evidence. They can't recover what isn't there," she snapped. "If we can't have it all, neither can they. Charge the lasers. Full power." It was a desperate, scorched earth gamble. Destroying the wreck would also destroy their only hope of exoneration, but it would deny the Concordat the chance to sanitize the scene. It was an admission of defeat, but also a final act of defiance. Just as Jian's fingers moved to the targeting controls, a new voice cut through the comms. Calm, measured, and resonating with an ancient authority. It wasn't human. "Terran vessel vigilance," the voice said. The Athelian language translated instantly by the ship's computer. "This is Emissary Kalen of the Concordat vessel Silent Willow. You are operating in a sector under Concordat observation. We have noted your unprovoked assault on a local scavenger clan. We are here to mediate and to render aid." The voice was smooth as polished stone, utterly devoid of threat, yet it carried an implicit, unshakable power. On the main screen, the image of Admiral Vance was replaced by that of an Athelian. He was tall and slender, his skin the color of pale marble, with large, dark eyes that held a galaxy of patience and wisdom. He stood on the bridge of his ship, a place of minimalist beauty, all flowing lines and soft, internal light. He looked less like a military officer and more like a philosopher king. It was a masterful performance. He wasn't accusing them. He was offering help. He was positioning the Concordat as the benevolent adults, arriving to clean up a mess made by unruly children. "Emissary Kalen," Eva replied, her own voice a carefully controlled monotone. "This is Commander Rostova of the TCS Vigilance. We were responding to a distress call from a Terran colony under attack. The scavenger clan you refer to were using military-grade hardware to slaughter civilians. Our actions were in defense of our people." Kalen's expression was one of deep, sorrowful concern. "A tragedy," he said, his voice dripping with sympathy. "Violence begets violence. It is the cycle we have long sought to help your young species break. The Cathar are a troubled people. It is true. Perhaps, in their desperation, they salvage technology beyond their understanding. Or perhaps," Eva countered, her anger a cold, sharp point. "They were given it." Kalen's serene expression didn't flicker. "A baseless and dangerous accusation, Commander. But we can discuss this. My fleet is arriving. They will secure the area to ensure no further loss of life. Your crew and your ship look damaged. We would be honored to offer you sanctuary and technical assistance until your own fleet arrives." It was a checkmate. He was offering them a gilded cage. To accept was to become their prisoners. To refuse was to confirm their guilt. On the tactical display, the 3 Concordat cruisers dropped out of FTL, their sleek, organic-looking ships dwarfing the battered Vigilance. They took up positions around the debris field, their weapons ports closed, their shields down, the very picture of non-aggression. But their presence was a suffocating blanket. "Commander," Gian whispered, "Salvage One is back aboard. They got the partial data download." Eva's mind raced, weighing her last. Terrible options. Fight, and they would be annihilated. Surrender, and they would be pawns in a political game they couldn't win. She looked at the face of the emissary. So calm, so reasonable, so utterly confident in his victory, and I knew she couldn't give him the satisfaction. There had to be another way. Her eyes fell on the tactical map, on the swirling chaos of the Tartarus Nebula and the treacherous asteroid field at its heart, the Corsair's graveyard. It was a place ships went to die, but it was also a place where they could disappear. A desperate plan, born of pure defiance, began to form in her mind. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was their only move left. "Emissary," Eva said, her voice ringing with a newfound, chilling conviction. "Thank you for your generous offer, but the Terran Confederation prefers to handle its own affairs." Kalen's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the first break in his perfect composure. "Commander, I must advise you against any rash actions." "This isn't rash." "Emissary," Eva replied, a grim smile touching her lips. "This is protocol." She turned to her crew, her voice dropping to a low, urgent command. "Jean, vent the plasma conduits from the main drive. Target the largest fragment of the Gorfang's reactor core. On my mark." "Commander, that will ignite the entire debris field," he protested. "I know," she said. "Helm, get us ready to burn for the graveyard. All remaining power to the aft shields and the engines. We're going to need it." She faced the screen one last time, looking the Athelian emissary directly in his ancient, knowing eyes. You wanted a show, Kalen. You're about to get one. Then, she gave the order. Mark. The command was a spark in a tinderbox. On Eva's mark, the Vigilance's aft plasma vents opened, spewing torrents of superheated, ionized gas directly into the debris field. The incandescent streams struck the exposed, fractured reactor core of the Gore Fang, and the laws of physics did the rest. The unstable core, already leaking radiation, went critical. For a fraction of a second, a new miniature sun was born in the space between the ships. A blinding, silent detonation of pure energy erupted, vaporizing the closest wreckage and turning the entire debris field into an expanding shell of incandescent shrapnel. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the main viewport was instantly polarized to its darkest setting, but the sheer intensity of the blast still flooded the room with an apocalyptic white light. Alarms screamed as the shockwave, a hammer blow of kinetic force and hard radiation, slammed into the ship. The cruiser groaned like a dying beast, its damaged frame pushed to the absolute limit. Aft shields are gone, the tactical officer yelled, his voice strained. We're taking direct hits from the shrapnel, multiple hull breaches on the lower decks. Helm. Burn. Now Eva roared, gripping the command console to stay upright as the deck shuddered violently. The main drive, already pushed past its safety limits, screamed in protest, but obeyed. The battered cruiser surged forward, plunging away from the fireball and directly toward the chaotic, jagged maw of the Corsair's graveyard. Behind them, the Athelian fleet was in disarray. Their shields, designed for focused weapon impacts, flared brilliantly as the undirected, omnidirectional blast wave washed over them. While the larger cruisers weathered the storm, the emissary's smaller, unshielded vessel, the Silent Willow, was caught in the worst of it. Ava watched on a secondary screen as the elegant silver ship was tossed end over end, its hull plating peeling away like scorched foil. It wasn't destroyed, but it was crippled, a wounded bird tumbling through the void. Emissary Kalen's calm, superior voice was replaced by a cacophony of Athelian damage alerts on the open channel. They had ripped the mask of serene benevolence from his face, and Eva allowed herself a brief, savage moment of satisfaction. They're recovering, Gian reported, his fingers flying across his console. The 3 cruisers are stabilizing. They're coming after us. They'll be cautious, Ava countered, her eyes fixed on the approaching asteroid field. They don't know what other tricks we have up our sleeves, and they won't follow us deep into the graveyard. Their ships are thoroughbreds, not mudrunners. It's too dangerous for them. The Corsair's graveyard lived up to its name. It was a 3-dimensional labyrinth of spinning, tumbling rock, from dust-sized particles that could sandblast a hull to planetoids large enough to have their own weak gravity. Navigating it at high speed was like flying through a blender. Bring us in low and fast, Ava commanded. I want to skim the surface of that big iron-rich asteroid, the one they call the Anvil. Its magnetic field will help scramble their long-range targeting. The Vigilance dove into the asteroid field, the helmsman wrestling with the controls as the ship bucked and swerved to avoid collisions. The proximity alarms were a constant, shrieking chorus. On the viewport, massive, craggy shapes whipped past, so close they seemed to scrape the hull. Outside, A storm of smaller debris hammered against the ship, the sound like a million tiny fists beating on the armor. Deeper and deeper they fled, using every trick Eva had learned in a decade of patrolling the galactic fringes. They vented plasma into the field's dense gas clouds to create ghost signatures, ducked behind spinning moonlets to break sensor locks, and at one point, flew directly through the hollowed-out husk of a long-dead pirate capital ship. The Athelian cruisers gave chase, but their pursuit was hesitant. Their elegant, streamlined ships were not designed for such brutal, close-quarters maneuvering. Twice, they fired their precise energy weapons, but the beams were deflected by the dense metallic composition of the asteroids, or simply missed as the Vigilance jinked and weaved. Finally, after a grueling hour that felt like a lifetime, they pulled back, unwilling to risk their valuable warships in the meat grinder. They're holding position at the edge of the field, Jian confirmed, a note of disbelief in his voice. I think we lost them. A collective, ragged breath of relief passed through the bridge crew. They had done the impossible. They had escaped a concorded battle group in a crippled ship, but they were far from safe. The Vigilance was a wreck. Its aft section was a mangled ruin. Life support was failing on 4 decks, and they had expended almost all of their remaining fuel in the desperate burn. They were adrift in the most dangerous patch of space in the sector, a wounded animal that had found a temporary hiding place. "Give me a full damage assessment," Eva said, her voice heavy with exhaustion, "and a status report on the data download. Is it still intact?" The news was a mixed bag of grim realities and a single, flickering ember of hope. The ship was, for all intents and purposes, dead in the water. The main drive was offline. The fusion core was running on emergency containment, and they had maybe 48 hours of breathable air left. But the data core, shielded in the most heavily armored section of the ship, had survived. The partial download from the Gorfang was secure. It was their proof, their justification, their legacy, but it was useless if it died with them. For the next several hours, the crew of the Vigilance became a salvage team for their own ship. Engineers in bulky vacuum suits worked outside, patching the worst of the hull breaches with emergency sealant. On the bridge, Ava, Jian, and the remaining command staff poured over the ship's schematics, trying to reroute power to coax a flicker of life back into the dead systems. It was a slow, desperate, and ultimately futile task. "It's no good, Commander," the chief engineer reported over the comm, his voice raspy with fatigue. "The main power conduits are slagged. We might be able to get a thruster or two back online, but the main drive, it's gone. We're not flying out of here." The finality in his tone settled over the bridge like a funeral shroud. They were stranded. Their defiant escape had only earned them a different, slower kind of death. They would run out of air long before the Valiant or any other rescue ship could find them. Eva walked to the viewport, staring out at the silent, indifferent dance of the asteroids. She had saved Haven. She had defied an empire. And for what to die here in the cold and the dark? Her victory a secret she would take to her grave. "Commander," Ian said softly, coming to stand beside her. "That partial download, I've been decrypting it." Eva turned, a spark of interest cutting through her despair. "What did you find?" "More than we could have hoped for," he said, a grim excitement in his eyes. He brought up a file on a nearby console. It was a series of encrypted shipping manifests, flight plans, and coded communications. "These are the Cathar's supply records for the last 6 months. They list detailed weapon shipments, serial numbers, delivery points, and the point of origin for every single piece of advanced hardware is a concordant military outpost in the Zephyrus sector. It's all here. The names, the dates. It's the smoking gun. He paused, his expression hardening. But there's more. The final entry is a communication log between the Cathar warlord and Emissary Kalen. The name sent a chill down Ava's spine. He wasn't just a diplomat. Jian continued. He was their handler. He personally gave the order to attack Haven. He called it a necessary demonstration to curb Terran expansionism. It's a direct confession. It was everything. The irrefutable proof Vance had said she needed. A direct link from the raiders on the ground to the highest echelons of the Concorded Diplomatic Corps. It was a revelation that could shatter the balance of power in the galaxy. And it was trapped on a dying ship in the middle of nowhere. The irony was a bitter pill. They held the key to saving the Confederation, but they couldn't get it out the door. The mood on the bridge turned from despair to a kind of quiet, simmering frustration. They had won the battle, won the chase, and found the truth, only to be defeated by a simple lack of fuel. As the hours ticked by and the oxygen alerts began to chime with increasing urgency, Eva gathered her command staff. Their faces were pale and drawn in the dim emergency lighting, but their eyes were still clear, still fixed on her. "We're not going to die here," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper that held no room for doubt. "We have the truth, and the truth is a weapon. We just need to find a way to fire it." She looked at the tactical map, at their own blinking icon lost in the sea of asteroids. They were trapped, but the graveyard wasn't just a tomb. It was a place of secrets. It was named for the pirates who had met their end here. Fleets of smugglers, marauders, and renegades who had used this labyrinth as their base of operations for centuries. And pirates. She knew. Always had a back door. "Mr. Jian," she said. A wild, improbable idea taking shape. "Start cross-referencing our sensor logs with the oldest star charts we have. I'm not looking for rocks. I'm looking for something that shouldn't be here. A power source, an old comms beacon, a pirate listening post. Something." It was a shot in the dark. A desperate search for a ghost in a graveyard. For hours. Jan sifted through terabytes of sensor data, filtering out the natural radiation and gravimetric distortions, searching for a single, artificial needle in a cosmic haystack. The air grew thinner. The lights on the bridge dimmed further as they conserved the last dregs of power. Just as Eva felt the first wave of lightheadedness from the lack of oxygen, Jian's head snapped up. "Commander," he breathed, his voice hoarse. "I think I've got something." A faint, repeating signal, heavily shielded. It's old, pre-Confederation tech. It's coming from deep inside the anvil. The anvil. The massive, iron-rich asteroid they had used for cover. A place no one in their right mind would go. "It's a distress beacon," Jian said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's been broadcasting on a loop for over 100 years. Ava looked at the coordinates, her mind racing. A pre-Confederation signal, 100 years old. It could be nothing. A ghost. An echo. Or it could be their salvation. "Get the engineers," she commanded, her voice ringing with renewed purpose. "I want every ounce of power we have left rerouted to the short-range thrusters. and get me a work crew with plasma cutters and exosuits. She turned to face her bridge crew, a fierce, determined light in her eyes. We're going to answer that call. The journey to the anvil was a funeral procession for a ship not yet dead. Using the last dregs of their power, the engineers coaxed a few of the maneuvering thrusters back to life. The Vigilance didn't fly so much as it drifted with purpose. A wounded whale making for a final, hidden shore. The trip took hours, a painstakingly slow crawl through the treacherous rockfield. On the bridge, the only light came from the red glow of emergency power and the cold, distant starlight filtering through the viewport. The air was thin and stale, each breath a conscious effort. Eva Rostova stood with her team at the main airlock, encased in bulky engineering exosuits. They were leaving the ship, a skeleton crew of 12, including Jan and her chief engineer. The rest of the crew were sealed in the most secure section of the ship with the remaining emergency oxygen. A silent, waiting vigil. "If we're not back in 12 hours, Eva said, her voice tinny over the suit's internal comm, "the ship is yours. Lieutenant Commander, use the remaining power to purge the data core. Don't let them get it." The officer on the other side of the reinforced glass gave a solemn nod, his face a grim mask of resolve. The outer doors hissed open, revealing the void. They pushed off, a small, fragile contingent against the immense, silent backdrop of the Corsair's graveyard. They were tethered to the ship by a single lifeline, their suit thrusters firing in short, controlled bursts as they navigated the short but perilous distance to the anvil's surface. The asteroid was a monster, a mountain of nickel iron hundreds of kilometers across. Its surface a chaotic landscape of craters and jagged ravines. The beacon led them to a narrow canyon, a fissure so deep and dark it seemed to swallow the light from their headlamps. At the bottom, almost completely buried by millennia of cosmic dust, was a set of blast doors. They were ancient, pitted, and scarred, built of a metallic alloy that predated the Confederation itself. Forcing them open was a brutal, hour-long ordeal of plasma cutters and hydraulic spreaders, the screech of tortured metal the only sound in the vacuum. When the doors finally groaned open, they revealed a cavern, not natural, but hollowed out from the rock, and inside, shrouded in the dust of ages, was a ghost. It was a pirate station, a relic from a forgotten era. Old, angular consoles stood in silent rows, and a massive, primitive fusion reactor sat dormant at its heart. A sleeping giant. The air was stale, but miraculously breathable, the station's life support having entered a deep hibernation mode. They had found Blackheart Station, the legendary, long-lost fortress of Silas Kane, the most infamous Corsair of the expansion era. "It's a museum," Gian breathed, his voice filled with awe as he ran a gloved hand over a dusty console. "But a functional one," the chief engineer added, his eyes fixed on the reactor. "The core is stable. The fuel rods are depleted, but the containment field is holding. If we can jump-start it with the Vigilance's emergency power packs, it was their only chance." For the next 8 hours, they worked in a feverish, desperate race against time. They jury-rigged a power conduit from their exosuits and the ship's remaining batteries to the ancient reactor. The station groaned and shuddered as power flowed through its veins for the first time in a century. Lights flickered on, old and yellow. Air recyclers whirred to life with a protesting shriek, And at the heart of the station, in the main command center, a colossal communications array, an archaic but incredibly powerful FTL transmitter, began to power up. It's designed to punch a signal through nebula interference, planetary magnetic fields, anything, Gian said, studying the schematics. It's a pirate's dream. They could broadcast from deep inside their hideout to anywhere in the sector. Get the data core linked up, Eva commanded, her voice ringing with an authority she hadn't felt since before the battle. I want the full, unredacted file ready to transmit. Everything. The manifests, Kaylin's confession, our own logs from the battle at Haven. As the file prepared to upload, a new alert flashed on one of the ancient consoles Gian had managed to interface with. The station's old passive sensors, now powered up, had detected the Athelian fleet still holding their blockade at the edge of the graveyard. But they had also detected something else. A single, say, familiar transponder. It's the Valiant, Jean said. Admiral Vance's flagship. They're here. A wave of conflicted emotion whooshed over Eva. Rescue and judgment. Vance had kept his word, but his arrival also signaled the end of her autonomy. The moment she was back under his command, the data would become a political tool, subject to negotiation, compromise, and backroom deals. The truth would be managed. How long until we can transmit? She asked, her eyes fixed on the blinking icon of the Valiant. The array is charged, the engineer confirmed. We can send it whenever you give the word. Ava stood before the transmitter, the fate of the galaxy literally at her fingertips. She could send the data directly to Vance, a secure, military transmission. It was the proper, lawful thing to do. It was the choice the old Ava Rostova would have made without hesitation. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had seen an entire colony nearly erased to maintain a fragile, dishonest peace. She had looked into the serene, lying eyes of emissary Kaylin. She knew that power, left to its own devices, would always protect itself. Gian, she said, her voice low and steady. Change the destination protocol. I don't want a tight beam to the Valiant. Gian looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. Where to? Commander everywhere, Ava said. Broadcast it. Unencrypted. On every open channel. The civilian news feeds. The Merchant Guild networks. Every military frequency from here to Earth. Let the whole galaxy see the truth. Let them all hear the dragon roar. It was an act of galactic insurrection. With a single command, she initiated the broadcast. A torrent of data, the concordant secret shame, poured out from the heart of the asteroid, a ghost scream that crossed the stars in an instant. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. On the bridge of the lead Athelian cruiser, Emissary Kaylin watched the data spill across his own public displays. His perfect, serene mask finally shattered, replaced by a look of cold, incandescent fury. His voice, when it came over the open channel, was no longer smooth or reasonable. It was the hiss of a serpent whose rock had been overturned. Commander Rostova, he seethed. You have just signed the death warrant for your species. No. Emissary, Ava replied, her voice echoing across the same channels for all to hear. I just signed yours. The Athelian fleet, its mission of containment now and galactic embarrassment, had no move left. To attack the Valiant would be an open declaration of war, confirming their guilt. To stay was to invite universal condemnation. In a final, telling display of their wounded pride, they turned, their sleek ships accelerating back into the silent dark, retreating not from a fleet, but from a single, undeniable truth. The aftermath was a paradigm shift. The Athelian Concordat, its moral authority shattered, fractured from within. The great quiet was broken by the clamor of a dozen vassal worlds demanding independence. Emissary Kalen was recalled in disgrace, his name becoming a byword for hubris. The Confederation was thrown into political chaos, but it was the chaos of rebuilding, not collapse. Humanity, no longer the fearful junior partner, found itself at the center of a new, emerging coalition of independent worlds, forged in the fire of the Concordat's betrayal. Ava Rostova and the crew of the Vigilance were not court-martialed. They were heroes. After being rescued from the graveyard, they were brought back to Titan not in chains, but to a thunderous welcome. Ava stood before Admiral Vance, no longer a subordinate, but an equal. "You lit a fire, Ava," he said, the ghost of a smile on his granite face. "Now you have to help us control the blaze." He offered her a new command, not of a single ship, but of a new task force, the Aegis Initiative, tasked with protecting the newly independent frontier worlds and shaping the new galactic order. Her first,